have been teaching IGCSE Global Perspective for 10 years, and I keep seeing the same common pattern of mistakes. Bright students who clearly understand the content, who have done their research, who write passionately about global issues, losing marks without even realizing it. And the worst part, these aren't content mistakes. These are invisible errors that even experienced teachers sometimes miss. If you're watching this video, you're probably one of those students, and let me guess. You got your paper back and you see a lower grade than expected and think, but I knew all the content. Sounds familiar? Hi, I am Karishma Attar and I have spent last decade teaching IGCSE Global Perspective. Over this 10 years, I have guided hundreds of students through their global perspective journey, and I have seen the same pattern emerge again and again. So today, I am going to share 5 most common invisible mistakes I see in Global Perspective individual report, or rather I would say it can be generalized to component 1, 2 and 3. These aren't the obvious ones you'll find in textbooks or your course books. These are the subtle errors I've learned to spot through years of teaching experience, and the ones that separate high achieving students from everyone else. So let me tell you about one of my students from a few years back. Let's call her Sarah. She was one of my most dedicated students, articulate, well-researched, passionate about environmental issues. She came to me after getting her component 1 result, that is her written paper, completely confused. I don't understand, she said. I spent weeks to understand how to write answers. I followed all the guidelines. How did I not get the grade I was expecting in this paper? So we sat down with her work, and within minutes, we could see exactly what had happened. It wasn't her written answer. It wasn't her strategy. It wasn't her understanding. It was 5 specific approaches that she, like most students, had never been explicitly taught or rather understood. So the thing is, Sarah's experience isn't unique. I have seen these same 5 mistakes cost students valuable marks over and over again. And that's why I am making this video, because these mistakes are preventable once you know what to exactly look for. Mistake number 1 is what I call the perspective trap. And it's something I see in most student work. So here's what happens. Students think showing different perspective means simply mentioning them. So they write things like economists believe or environmental activists argue, and then they move on. But what Global Perspective really want to see is your analysis of these perspectives, their strengths, limitation, and validity. Let me show you the difference. So weak perspective work sounds like this. Economists argue that carbon taxes hurt business growth. That's just reporting. Strong perspective analysis sounds like this. While economists raise valid concerns about carbon taxes affecting short-term business costs, this perspective may not fully consider the potential long-term economic benefit of environmental policies, such as innovation in green technologies. So see the difference. You are not just listing perspectives, you are thinking critically about them. And that's what elevates your work. Now moving on to the second mistake. The mistake is called as the evidence confusion. Mistake number 2 is something I spend a lot of time clarifying with my students because it's so fundamental yet so misunderstood. Students often confuse examples, evidence, and analysis. They think they all are the same thing. They are not. For example, many countries use carbon taxes, such as Sweden. Evidence provides specific support. Carbon taxes can be effective policy tools as suggested by environmental improvements in countries that have implemented them. And analysis explains the significance. The evidence suggests that economic instruments like carbon taxes may be more effective than purely regulatory approaches because they provide market incentives for change. And in my experience, students who learn to distinguish between these 3 elements explicitly and use all of them effectively consistently produce stronger work. It's about building layers of understanding and not just simply stating facts. That takes me to the next mistake, is the structure weakness. This brings me to the mistake number 3, which was actually Sarah's biggest challenge: weak analytical structure. So generally, when I look at the answers student write, it's very evidently seen that in the first few paragraphs, a student has mastered analytical structure, especially in a 20-mark question. Most students think that having an introduction, body paragraphs, and cohesion equals good structure. But this is not English, it's global perspective. It requires a specific type of structured analytical flow. Weak structure looks like this: separate paragraphs that each discuss different aspects independently. Strong structure looks like this: ideas that build on each other, while each paragraph connects to the previous one and leads logically to the next, creating a coherent analytical argument. So what I have learned to teach my students is that every paragraph should answer the question, so what? If you can't explain why that paragraph matters to your overall analysis, it probably needs restructuring. So mistake number 4 is what I call the evaluation gap, and it's often the difference between good work and excellent work. Students become very good at presenting information and showing different perspectives, but they struggle with the crucial next step, that is evaluation. And that is where most of your maximum mark questions focus on. They describe what people think instead of assessing the quality of those thoughts. I often give my students this type of exercise. After presenting any piece of information or perspective, they must ask themselves 3 questions. How reliable is this? What might be missing? Which viewpoint is better supported and why? Students who consistently do this evaluation step produce much stronger work. And trust me, it requires practice. You need to train your brain to think accordingly. So what I have noticed over years is that evaluation is a skill that needs explicit teaching, training, unlearning and relearning. It doesn't just happen naturally, but once students learn it, their analytical thinking improves dramatically, not just in global perspective, but across subjects and in day-to-day life. Mistake number 5, that is personal voice. And finally, something that took me several years of teaching to fully understand. Student often eliminates their own analytical voice when they write answers. So early in my teaching career, I thought global perspective wanted neutral or academic writing. But I gradually realized after looking at so many answers, examiners report, mark scheme, that the best student work has a clear analytical voice where you can hear the student thinking through issues, making connections and reaching reasoned conclusions. So weak work sounds like a report, detached and neutral, and strong work sounds like a thoughtful analysis. The student makes statements like, while this evidence appears convincing, it's important to consider, or having examined these different approaches, I find X more compelling than Y because. So what I now teach my student is that global perspective wants your reasoned judgment on evidence. It's not asking you to be neutral. It's asking you to be thoughtful and analytical. So what happened with Sarah? Once she learned these 5 areas for improvement, she applied them to not only her component 1, but also her component 2, that is individual report. She learned to analyze perspectives rather than just state them, to evaluate evidence rather than just present it, and to develop her own analytical voice. Her improvement was remarkable. But what she told me later was even more valuable. She said, it changed how I think about everything, not just global perspective. I started questioning things more, looking for evidence, considering different viewpoints. And that's when I knew these weren't just exam techniques, they were critical thinking skills. And that is what exactly global perspective as a subject wants to build in its learners. That is what I love about global perspective. When taught well, it doesn't just improve your grades, it develops real world analytical skill. So I have seen too many capable students miss out on their potential because of these 5 common mistakes they do in global perspective, component 1, 2 and 3. And if you like this video, make sure you subscribe if you're a global perspective learner, and I'll see you in the next video where I'll share some advanced techniques that my highest achieving students use. Thank you.